Yes.
Like,
That's what
yeah.
I was going to say too. Thank you.
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, so I can make
Yeah,
it a little bit
that's good.
bigger.
Mhm.
And so just for some context for everyone, obviously we're getting fairly close to our full board meeting, which will be on Friday, May 26th, where we're hoping to approve the full strategic plan. And so this committee's one pager is a part of that. And so we're looking for any last minute feedback from all of you. The feedback that we got at the last meeting was great. We went ahead and incorporated that. In the email that I sent all of you, we also created a feedback tracker where we showed where we incorporated the edits that you all provided to us, which was very helpful. And then we didn't receive any emails or requests for meeting or anything like that. So this is an opportunity for any last minute feedback. And then either today or tomorrow, depending on timing, I hope to send out the entire strategic plan. So it'll include the introductory piece, some context about the board, and then it'll include all of the one pagers. So hopefully it'll paint a fuller picture for all of you. And then you'll be able to provide feedback on that for roughly a week. And then it's going to go to the operating committee, which will vote on it, and then the full board. So today is really just to get sign off from all of you to then incorporate this into the full strategic plan, which you all will be able to review. And then one final round of feedback on anything that you all might have. And then it'll go to the full board. So before we dive in, does anyone have any questions about that timeline or how this committee fits into that or anything there? No? Okay, great. So I wasn't planning to read it through just because it's fairly similar to the last time that I shared it with all of you. But if anyone has any comments or if we want to read it through, we definitely can do that. But on my screen is the new updated version that we can review, or if anyone has any questions or comments. Nothing. Nobody has any comments. I
Abby,
can
I'm
read it through
wondering-
if that would help.
Yeah, I was wondering if we could go to the bottom of it too.
Sure. Yeah, let me scroll down. Alex?
Yeah, so I don't know if this is germane exactly, but I am wondering if there's any discussion in terms of what the requirements of eligible training providers are. I know like the data that's expected to be collected plays a big role or at least played a big role in who was and was not allowed to remain on the eligible training provider list. And so I'm just wondering if that's part of our purview or not.
Yeah, so I think that's a joint effort with the Department of Labor and with the Agency of Education. I don't know, Jay, I know now you're on screen. Do you have any comments on that or the ongoing process?
Well, I apologize for missing some of it. My computer decided it would be a good idea to shut down. And so I just picked up on the last part of what Alex was talking about. So the requirements for the eligible training provider list are pretty much dictated in WIOA, including what data are required for providers to submit to us. And that isn't something that we can change. So I think the question is the work of this committee really driven by WIOA, or is it something beyond WIOA?
Yeah, and I know that obviously I wasn't a part of those conversations, but in 2019, the working group that you all had written in that you wanted the group to be more involved in the approval process with the eligible training providers. So that's something that once we start this work, we can talk about those conversations again. If that's something you all are interested in, we can. But when Tori and I were writing this, we were really basing it off of those 2019 findings that we had. So I think that was where we were planning to pick up again, and that's where that language came from.
And trying to put that hat back on for a second, I think we're trying to create a place where we can identify a list of credentials and map them to this one can be covered with WIOA, this one is eligible for secondary CTE, and just have a a grid where people could easily see which credentials can be covered by which program or are reportable under certain programs.
But I guess in theory, there's a training provider may be able to deliver a credential, but may not be able to adhere to like the data collection requirements that, and so I see that as an equity issue to consider, especially when our own Department of Labor has its own, history with being able to adequately protect Social Security numbers. Well, how, just how do we expect like a local CDL truck driving school with 2 employees to do something similar? So I know there isn't an answer today, but I think in terms of like the equity component of who can be an eligible training provider and who cannot, it's rarely has to do with the quality of their curricula. So I'll just throw that out there and move on. There's other hands here.
Okay, so it sounds like Alex more focusing on that accessibility piece is something that for becoming an eligible training provider, something you want the group to focus on. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I know that there are training providers in our region who were like kicked off the list before the list was scrapped because of their they didn't track, wages from someone, X number of years beyond their graduation, which is something our high schools don't do, don't have the capacity to do necessarily. So I think that just if it's statutory, we can't do anything about it, that's fine. But in looking at creating equity in terms of where providers are able to operate. It could be separate third-party technical assistance created for people who want to become eligible training providers. Here's how you safely collect Social Security numbers. Here's how it could look like a bunch of different things, but I just know that that the list isn't the end of it. It's really preparing providers who have the curricula to be that provider.
Okay. Jay, do you have any other comments there? It looked like maybe you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I think there are other mechanisms that we have at our disposal to help those training providers be able to report information that's accomplished through a memorandum of understanding with the Unemployment Insurance Division, for instance, to get wages, taking the burden off of those training providers. But the other part of it is if we're not able to do that, we do still have state funds that can fund an individual in a training program with a less of a reporting burden than the WIOA requirements have. So we taking the equity point to heart, we want people to be able to enter and participate in training programs that lead to a credential that has value. We want to make sure we're still keeping that in mind. So we either have federal funds that can do that through the ETP list, or we have state funds that can do that through the list of credentials that we all sort of review and approve. We don't want people to get state funding for basket weaving certificate if we don't need basket weavers.
Okay, I see a few hands. I think John will
Great,
be the first one.
Oh, thank you. I don't know if I was the first one. I always, whenever I think about challenge or whatever, the first thing I think about is the audience, right? Who's the audience? And in this particular case, I feel like we have 2 separate types of audiences, right? We have potential job seekers that are coming up, or individuals in other jobs that are maybe looking to change careers or whatever. But then, my world, it's employers, right? So thinking about all the employers. And so I think when we start looking at credentials, we track credentials through the Vermont Training Program, and out of 1,200 and some odd people that we funded last year, 243 certificates or credentialing and apprenticeships have been covered as well. So almost a full 1/6. And my guess is none of those training providers, or very few of them, are actually on the WIOA list. So I think we just got to keep that in the back of our minds that creating credentials, creating training, and clearly the employer is paying 50% of the training costs with a training program grant, as well as paying the wages and benefits of their employee during that. So clearly, to my opinion, it's a credential of value because we have an employee or an employer actually purchasing that. So I think with conversations, just to sort of keep the sort of the two different audiences in mind. And I think it would be important for our committee to make sure to have some sort of a cumulative list out there, sort of to the point of other people, not just but anyways, the bottom line is I think we need sort of a combined list that's going to be good for both of our audiences.
Yasmin?
Yeah, I was thinking similarly along these lines, and I guess Jay, maybe this is a question mostly for you. I realize I'm running on like a 4-year-old memory here, but exactly to John's point about we need this master list. I think you described it also, Jay, right? All the ETPs, all the credentials of value, right? The different funding streams. I'm just curious how the work of doing that and by whom intersects with the timelines we have here for our committee, which is anticipating, by December, we're reestablishing evaluation process. By March next year, reopening, right? And by June, a sort of continuous approval process. I think all of that presumes we have this kind of master list in place, I think. So I just wanted to check my understanding against where we're at in the sort of details of who might be working on pulling those different information sources together as they exist today.
Yeah, well, I'll talk about the WIOA ETP process at least. That's a thing that we are required to do, and whether it's the department or it's a task that's delegated to this committee, we have to create a system where we are vetting the providers who want to be on the list to make sure that they're providing the credentials that are in need and that they have the capacity to follow through with the reporting requirements. And I'm going to say that's a very small subset because that's what we are going to be using our WIOA funds for an individual to pay for. If they're not on the eligible training provider list, not a big deal. We just can't use WIOA funds to pay for them. So we still need that list of credentials that a group of people have reviewed and said these are valuable, these are recognized, and whatever the other factors are. Portability was another thing in the work of the committee. There are a couple of other factors, but we need to, I think, focus primarily on that process. How does something get on the list as a credential of value in the state of Vermont, so that when the staff in our regional offices are helping people with a training plan, and we're providing funds to have them have that process paid for, we know that they're working toward a credential that an employer recognizes, that has value, and it's not just something out in the middle of nowhere that's not meaningful. So
So is it
it's of work.
Yeah, so is it the work, so then just to clarify, is it the work of this committee to review and evaluate some sort of master list per the definition we've been working towards, or does that actual review work happen elsewhere and then our committee is kind of taking a look at the sort of what comes out of that review?
I think it's the committee is looking at the list that comes out of a review and request process. Again, getting back to my 4-year-old memory,
yeah,
that we would have a process here at the department, and the Agency of Education might have a separate but related process for the tech centers, and we're jointly reviewing those things and making a recommendation to the committee that these credentials be on the list, again, separate from the provider list. We're primarily interested in what those credentials are. Not just
Thanks.
getting the training for them.
And I think what I can do, Yasmin, is we can add a milestone here saying, you know, I know we've mentioned in December of 2023, reestablishing the evaluation process, but prior to that work, it sounds like maybe there's a gap here and just catching up on the processes that are going on with AOE and VDOL, and maybe having some meetings where Jay or someone from AOE comes in and lets us know what the current process is, and if there's a list, when it's been updated, that sort of thing, and where the committee fits in. So I think, you know, right now, we're not necessarily discussing how the committee fits into that, because I feel like we don't have all the information, but I'm happy to add a milestone here to say that that will be the first step, rather than delving right into the work to address some of the concerns that you're raising.
Great.
Does that seem to make sense?
That makes good sense. Thanks, Abby.
Okay, good. Molly?
I just had, this is not such a process question, but I had a question about apprenticeships and how they fit into the credentialing process, in terms of if you have an apprenticeship program, you know, what needs to happen to turn that into a credential? Is it if you meet the requirements of the apprenticeship, which I know that there's a bill moving through the legislature now to get to align the programs with the federal requirements. But, you know, if you meet those, would that be would that lead to a credential, is my question, I guess.
Yeah, I would say if an employer's program is registered with us, then it automatically puts them on the list, because it's results in a credential of value, the certificate of completion.
I just had one other thing too. I know that a couple of us gave some feedback, and I was not one of them, but has that been, are we going to talk about that, or has that been already incorporated into the one pager?
So the feedback that was provided in the last meeting has been incorporated, and we sent out that Excel doc that says John Young comment, and then says where it's been addressed. And then we didn't receive any requests to meet with anyone offline or any other emails. So those comments have been incorporated.
Sorry, I stepped out of the room for a second, so
That's
I
okay.
think you already covered that,
No
but
worries.
thank you.
Marilyn?
So I still am a little confused. So I love everything that people are saying, and it sounds great, but I'm a little confused about how we know the quality of the training. So not that the certificate is of value. I think that that's pretty, no, I don't know if it's easy, but that's something I think that's very quantifiable. But is there a space in here where you're determining whether the person who is providing the training is actually providing training that results in someone who's ready to work in that field, that credential that they're getting doesn't just have value to the state of Vermont, in that we need more dental hygienists, but that the dental hygienist program they just went through actually was a valid training program? Is that part of this conversation as well?
So we don't necessarily have any thing that points out here to tracking metrics, but there are other portions of the plan that mention tracking those sort of metrics. So we are definitely looking for that feedback that these training programs translate into actual jobs, and that's something that we're interested in looking in, but it's not spoken to specifically in this one pager. It's in some of the others that are just more general pages that the board is going to be focusing on. If we wanted to add a metric regarding quality of credentials, if that's what I'm understanding you're saying, we could certainly discuss that as a committee and add it. But as far as tracking and metrics, those are noted in other portions of the plan, which obviously you have not seen yet, but we're going to send out.
Yeah, my concern is really the quality of the training itself. Does that trainer and does that training, even though it attaches to a credential that we think we need in the state, there are different levels of training, which we see at VSAC all the time with the programs that we work with and that we track. So, so that's what I'm really looking at, is the trainer themselves and the program they offer, despite the credential that seems to be attached to it, does the training. And I think if you're talking about our colleges or you're talking about our CTEs, there's already processes in place that ensure the quality of that training. But when you get out beyond that, it becomes a little bit of the wild, wild west.
Jay, do you know, are there any of that, is there any of that tracking that's going on after the fact with those credentials?
Yeah, it's the wild, wild west across the United States and probably the planet. I would say, third-party accreditation is sort of in the vicinity of what we're talking about. So, dental assisting might have a third-party accreditation process for these programs because it's a regulated profession. So I think we would want to look for some indicator of a third-party review or some other process that the training provider has gone through to certify that they're compliant with whatever the expectations of the industry or the profession are. Those would be indicators we could use. But no.
Well, in Northern Lights at CCV, actually, when how they manage the delivery of their early childhood education curricula is actually maybe something that to look into, because they know their curricula is good, and there are people who are certified to do it, but you need to sign a number of agreements with Northern Lights to make sure that they know their curricula is good, but the quality of instruction and delivery of instruction, there's got to be some sort of commitment and fidelity around that. So I think that's something, because to be frank, I have serious concerns about the equity around saying CCV and VTC are great, and we know those are good, but there's the Wild West. Well, in the communities that our state college system is retracting from, it is the Wild West. And our folks do need solutions, and they do need training opportunities. So I think that it's there must be a way for us to do it that doesn't put the burden on, again, our small local CDL driver that the state college system is has staff members to complete. So of course we want the quality to be good, but I think it's just an equity concern I have.
John, is that another hand?
Yes, thanks. And Marilyn, that's a good point that you brought up. And I think the advantage of my particular program is that the onus is on the employer. They're the ones that go out and get the training provider. And sometimes it doesn't work out so well. And they end up, if there's multiple trainings that they're going to apply for or paying for, they might even drop the training provider, after the first training, because it wasn't a good match for them. And so I'm just wondering, out of the box, thinking crazy probably, but for our CTEs, we have the RABs, right? The regional advisory boards. We have, for the Vermont training program, we have a review panel, if you will, that reviews every grant. So it's not just our department. Could we potentially look at, I sort of joke that it's a SAB, it's the Sector Advisory Board. It's hard to get employers to participate maybe like on a credentialing committee, because they kind of go, well, I go to the meetings and we don't talk about manufacturing hardly at all, or we don't, it's time out of my busy day. But in the virtual world that we're in today, could we ever think about having some sort of a sector advisory board where they're just looking at these applications, whether it comes through Department of Labor, and maybe Jay will say we already have something like that, but not that would verify and fix everything that Marilyn brought up, but clearly you never know. You might hear from an employer going, oh, we've used that little CDL school before and it was a great, they did well or they did great. So just some thoughts going down the road, maybe an advisory board for some of our major sectors might be a good idea.
Okay. Yeah, so it sounds like I'm hearing maybe adding a milestone on having a better sense of the current situation before diving into the committee's work, and then also maybe adding a milestone at the end about equity and quality of credential of value. Does that sound correct? And potential involvement from stakeholders to address the equity piece regionally.
I think so.
Abby,
Mhm.
sorry,
We can hear you.
this is Tom. I can't participate with the video because I'm
That's
taking
okay.
care
We
of
can hear
kiddos
you.
today. But I'm wondering what level this conversation is getting kind of tactical versus more strategic, like milestones. So I see a lot of the conversation over the past, well, most of this meeting that I've been on, I joined a little late, really, I think, kind of being built into the milestone as we're kind of reviewing what the definition of credential value is and what that process looks like.
Mhm.
So certainly you could create another milestone that may, try to just preserve a value that we want to make sure we're including in this process. But I really think a lot of this gets to that kind of tactical decision-making level
I would
with credential
agree.
of value definition and the process.
I would agree. Any other questions or comments? Okay, great. So I think what we've been doing in our other meetings is just getting an informal raising of hands for approval of the page. And then again, this is not the last time that you'll be able to provide feedback either by the end of today or tomorrow. I'll be sending out the full strategic plan. That way you'll have context of what other committees are doing, what the full board is doing, what Tori and I are doing. That way you have a better sense of what's going on in different issues and where. And then you'll have a week to provide any comments or feedback. You can chat with Tori and I over the phone or just provide an email feedback, whatever you prefer. But then it's going to be going before the operating committee and then the full board meeting where they'll be voting to approve it. And then we'll go ahead and get to work on everything that we've laid out in this plan. So does anyone have any questions about that timeline? Okay. Great. So then can I just get informal approval from all of you on the one pager plan? Any objections from anyone? I see a few thumbs up. Nobody else? Okay, great. So I will go ahead and send this out to you all either today or tomorrow. And then I think we plan to have the committee meet again either in late June or early July to go ahead and get to work. But so probably a little bit over a month before we all convene one more time. Any other final questions, feedback, concerns? No? Okay, great. I will let you all have 28 minutes back in your day, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their day.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Great. Have a good one.
Thanks.